When Tim and I were discussing today's presentation, he asked me what a recovering academic might be. Actually, a friend suggested the phrase, and I thought it was interesting, but it does express some truths about my working life. Academic anthropology was my identity and the focus of my plans from the age of 19 till I was 38 and abruptly dismissed from my tenure-track job at Queens College in New York. I had taken a semester off to write my first book after teaching at Queens for 5 years. I did not know that taking leave would send me back to zero, according to CUNY rules. No tenure review was needed. They just didn't renew my contract. So the year I returned turned out to be my last year.
Oh my goodness.
Office politics hadn't been a priority for me, and I didn't get along especially well with the dominant guys in the anthro department. Feminist friends in our Ruth Benedict collective consciousness raising group had warned me before I took the job that some of the guys at Queens could be rough with women.
Suzanne, you just muted yourself. Oh, everybody's muted.
Yeah, sorry, me. That was
No,
my.
I'm okay now. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Feminist friends in our Ruth Benedict collective had warned me before I took the job at Queens that some of the guys there could be rough with women colleagues, and they were right. I thought my good relationships with other South Asia scholars and my hard work teaching and research would get me through. I was wrong. Several years later, I got a few $100s as part of a class action lawsuit settlement relating to what was eventually called sexual harassment of women professors. A friend and I used to joke that the only thing about worse than not getting tenure at Queens College might be getting tenure at Queens College. Nonetheless, leaving that job, failing to get tenure, made me feel ashamed and in a state of exile. I asked myself, am I still an anthropologist? I loved my research and teaching, and I had several fellowships and grants to fund research related to symbolic anthropology, Lévi-Strauss structuralism, and cognitive anthropology. I had recently done 2 summers of ethnobotany research in the South Indian village where I did my dissertation studies. I taught courses on anthropological theory, folklore, South Asia, East Asia, gender, and of course, a lot of introductory anthro. I had 5 or 10 years of research and writing planned out, thousands of pages of field notes, numerous photos, lots of statistical and other data to be analyzed. I had been a member of AAA since I was an undergraduate, and I was quite active in the Society for South India Studies, Association for Asian Studies. Anyway, not being independently wealthy, I did need a job. The 2 best jobs in South Asian studies went to University of Chicago PhDs. Dragging my 12-year-old daughter around the country to fill 1-year academic posts would have been a miserable life. Adjunct teaching would have been seriously underpaid. I taught at Barnard for a semester after leaving Queens, but there didn't seem to be any future for me in academia. So I decided to cut my losses and explore the unfamiliar territory of non-academic employment. This was February '79. In the end, it all worked out quite well, and New York City turned out to be a very good place to be stranded professionally. But the transition was not an easy one. I was fortunate to have much encouragement from 4 or 5 senior anthropologists who had mentored me along the way, especially Abe Rossman at Columbia, Stan Freed at the Museum of Natural History, and my undergraduate professor, Dave French, at Reed College. Their support made me feel less of an exile and more of an explorer. The transition took about 7 months. I really had no idea what I wanted to do with my life other than teach and do research, but 2 experiences helped me to get a sense of direction in this unfamiliar territory. The first experience was a 6-week course at Columbia for people like me who were changing careers. I think there was more of a shift towards adjuncts at that time. I wasn't aware of it, but I think for universities were kind of giving up on tenure, so there were a lot of us in that career transition class. One assignment was to identify successful experiences we had had, not just from recent years, but from our whole lives. We needed to identify what personal qualities we had that had made those successes for us. One of my successes had been a high school volleyball team. The personal quality I brought to this was being good at cooperating with others. Our volleyball team never let the ball drop to the ground. Another of my successes was in grant writing. The second life-changing experience was more complicated. The American Museum of Natural History hired me to guide a group of wealthy donors on a trip around India and Nepal. Wildlife sanctuaries were the focus, and a naturalist accompanied me. Our guests saw rhinos and many other animals, but the tigers the museum had promised failed to appear, despite the fact that we spent hours ambling through a jungle on elephant back. Other disappointments followed. The accommodations at the game sanctuaries were not comfortable. These travelers were used to luxury, and they didn't have enough time for shopping. One plane was canceled altogether. I did my best to cheer them up, but many were grouchy. And one major museum donor, a recovering alcoholic, had a complete meltdown in the airport waiting room when our plane failed to appear. He shouted at the other passengers, the other people waiting around for the missing plane, that Indians were terrible at technology and generally an unworthy population. His wife, a former model of American Indian descent, was also arrogant and stupid. As we drove into a Nepal game sanctuary, she asked me in a now familiar condescending tone of voice, "Suzanne, is that a bird or is it an animal?" I said, "It's an animal." She said, "Then why does it have a tail?" Okay, these people were really, I didn't like them. So my personal revelation came during the week after this miserable tour ended. I think it lasted for a whole month. I had considered working for a foundation before, but on that trip, I realized I didn't really want to spend my work catering to the needs of wealthy people like these. My parents, after all, had been Marxists, and I was and am very left-wing at heart. I somehow managed to make contact with a woman in Bombay who was devoting her energy to helping poor women. She was a Brahmin, and the women, many from lower castes, cooked lunches for Bombay factory and office workers. I think the people who ate the meals assumed that the Brahmin woman was cooking them, but these people were cooking them. She brought me into meetings with a couple of her groups. One of them spoke the South Indian language that I knew, and we had a very interesting conversation. One woman asked me, "Are there any poor people in America?" I said, "Sure, yes, there were." She then exclaimed, "Go back there and tell them to do this work. You get income from it and you get food too." This was a watershed moment for me. I now realize what I wanted to do with my working life, something to benefit poor people. When I got back to New York in the spring of '79, I started looking for some kind of work that I could do along those lines. It was a pretty good time to do this. Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty was underway. The U.S. Community Services Administration and the Ford Foundation had been funding community development projects since the mid-1960s. Now aware that grant writing was a marketable skill, I searched for jobs writing grants, and by October 1979, I got a job at the Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation in New York, the first and largest of the program's 16 or 17 community development corporations. Restoration had been founded in 1967 by Robert F. Kennedy, with backing from the Ford Foundation and the U.S. Community Services Administration. These community development corporations were established to work in a holistic manner, simultaneously on commerce, health, housing, youth employment, and the arts. This holistic vision of community development had been inspired in part by community studies of the sort I had done in India. I was no longer in exile. I was home. I remember thinking at the time, if I had gotten tenure, I'd like to take a leave of absence and come hang out at a place like this. It was a pleasure talking with staff about their plans and writing proposals for them. One of the vice presidents, a former priest married to a former nun, asked me how I was able to understand what they were trying to do and write it down so clearly. The ethnographic experience definitely had come in handy. The setting was elegant. The people working were quite professional. We had great parties. The 200-person staff was mostly African American. I think there were about maybe 20 white people there. The place fostered a wholesome self-respect, and I worked there for 4 years. After Reagan was elected president, however, the war on poverty was abandoned, the Community Services Administration was gradually dismantled, and staffing at Restoration eventually was cut drastically. It still exists, by the way, but in a very small form. In 1984, I moved over to do more grant writing, this time for a network of 13 family planning clinics in poor New York City neighborhoods, the Community Family Planning Council. This group of clinics had been set up by the city and was being reinvented as a nonprofit organization in accord with the neoliberal economic policies that Reagan was fostering. New nonprofit organizations like this one were scrambling to find new sources of funding and hiring grant writers like me. My associates were very smart and experienced people. Several had shifted over from Planned Parenthood. They were mostly African American, Hispanic, and Chinese. I worked there for another 4 years, learning about reproductive health. Adolescent pregnancy was a major concern at that time and a focus of several of the proposals I wrote. I thought of getting an MPH at that point because I was becoming very aware of public health, master's in public health, but talked myself out of it. I mean, it took me about 30 years to get to the PhD, and who wanted to go back to grad school? Anyway, after 8 years of grant writing, I decided to do more work on my own instead of writing about other people's projects. I moved over to work in city government. By then, I had a reasonably good understanding of how to plan and implement social and health programs. I also was familiar with the city's low-income neighborhoods and many of the nonprofit organizations. I started out in the planning department of the New York City Human Resources Administration, a mega agency that managed all social services. My first assignment for the city was to meet with a number of district council members who were being dumped by the Human Resources Administration now that the War on Poverty's participatory planning approach had been abandoned. I interviewed these enthusiastic community council members, carefully noted down their complaints at being ignored, and delivered my report to the commissioner. I only realized later that my job had been to reassure them that city government still cared what they thought. But the city, and I don't think they did, and the city staff no longer had the funding or the personnel to consult with them. Top-down planning is much less labor-intensive than people's participation. In the planning department, I also worked on how best to prepare youth in foster care for independent living when they turned 18. During the next 3 years, I moved around the city's social services bureaucracy, helping out with various social service and women's health projects. In 1988, meanwhile, I finished writing and publishing that book I had been writing while teaching at Queen's, Colored Rice, Symbolic Structure in Hindu Family Festivals. Here it is. With the cover by Duran Jacobson. Okay. During the next, one advantage I found of working 9 to 5 turned out to be weekends. I actually had Saturdays and Sundays off rather than having to use them to prepare classes. Okay, since some of the previous work with the Community Family Planning Council had concerned teen pregnancy, I was something of an expert in that subject. My mother also had been a very strong supporter of Planned Parenthood and contraception for teens before it was legal. When a job in the mayor's office of adolescent pregnancy and parenting service became available, I took it. This very interesting job went on for almost 2 years, until Mayor Koch left office at the end of 1989. After leaving the mayor's office, I was hired to do a one-year review of New York City's kinship foster care program. As a proper social anthropologist, I understood kinship, of course, and I liked the idea of relatives caring for children instead of strangers doing it. The city's program, however, was a mess, financially and in every other way. And the Child Welfare Administration, which it was called at that time, was being sued by the Legal Aid Society because kinship foster care was so disorganized. Kinship foster care is now a widely accepted concept, but relatives don't always meet the strict guidelines required for set for foster homes. And there were a great many problems with both supervision of placements and the issuing of payments. Working for the agency's commissioner, Robert Little, a brother of Malcolm X, who had himself grown up in foster care, I analyzed the program by spending much time talking with staff about placement, monitoring, and payment processes. It was all quite confused at that time. It wasn't exactly ethnography, but it was something like it. I met with staff at all levels of the 8,000-person agency, caseworkers, managers, fiscal staff, and I did come up with a number of suggestions for improvement. They offered me a job in the finance department, but that really didn't interest me. So in August 1991, that job was done. And my daughter was leaving for grad school in California, so I didn't really need to stay in New York. Just then, an old friend from college, Murray Leaf at the University of Texas, Dallas, called to ask if I would like to go to Bangladesh to do a study of women's experiences in floods. It was on a USAID-funded project that was part of a 17-country program called the Flood Action Plan. I had been wondering how or when I was ever going to get back to South Asia, and I gladly accepted the offer. Now, this was the first non-academic job for which my anthropology background in South Asia and my PhD were relevant qualifications. I worked as a consultant in this project for about 3 more years, making frequent trips back and forth between New York and Bangladesh, learning about the world of international development and building new friendships with colleagues, some Bangladeshi, some European, and a few Americans. We studied women in floods. We observed the life of people occupying temporary islands in the Jamuna River. My assignments all had something to do with women's issues, what we call then women in development. My sense of alienation from academia continued to bother me. At some point during this period, I mentioned to Barbara Johnston at an applied anthro meeting that I felt institutionally homeless. She kindly offered me an associate position in her Center for Political Ecology, and now I had that affiliation to put on my resume. Eventually, the Flood Action Plan ended, and I moved on to work in a great many other projects. One was a baseline study of water and sanitation for the Danish aid agency. I also did a lot of what we call program evaluation studies, checking to see if projects are functioning as expected and having the desired outcomes. I did 2 big final evaluation studies of large projects relating to water, sanitation, and hygiene. And I had some consulting positions in government offices, making sure that women's interests were being respected, that women were suitably participating in local water resources planning. I was on the consultant rosters of several large organizations that Tim listed earlier: UNICEF, World Health Care, WaterAid UK, and the World Bank. I mobilized a team of 4 well-educated, enthusiastic Bangladesh colleagues. 3 of them had master's degrees and 1 had a bachelor. They became associates of a consulting company planning alternatives for change that Dr. Eva Friedlander and I had formed. Having this company made me feel less unemployed in between consulting assignments. Our fantastic team did a lot of field work in all parts of the country on various assignments. We always coordinated with the local survey research firm, Pathways Consulting, run by a well-known environmental activist, Mr. Mohidul Haq Khan. We would go in and get the in-depth understanding of whatever water, sanitation, hygiene, or gender issue we were investigating, and the Pathways staff did questionnaire interviews and statistical analysis. We wrote our questionnaires together. This combination of qualitative and quantitative information turned out to be really very powerful. One especially gratifying aspect of this social development work was the attention given to people's participation, my old friend from the War on Poverty days. We became close to Professor Robert Chambers of Sussex University, a champion of participatory planning. Robert had managed to define and explain qualitative research methods in ways that NGOs worldwide came to accept. He was an excellent source on various techniques of what came to be called rapid rural assessment, such as key informant interviews, group discussions, transect walks, situation analysis, all participant observation techniques that can be used to find out what's going on in a specific place in a short period of time. We generally stayed 4 or 5 days in each place we visited. We investigated the problem of arsenic in drinking water and people's participation of it. We went into some depth in our interviews. We learned how people felt about getting toilets close to their houses rather than defecating in gardens or woods. One woman told me that digging a pit latrine in her latrine near her house compound would defile the whole place, so she preferred to defecate in the river. In one World Bank report, I mentioned concepts of purity and pollution, which are as important in Bangladesh as anywhere else in South Asia. This upset a Bangladesh World Bank staff member. She felt it made her country seem backward. But my long experience in South Asia enabled me to stand my ground and keep purity and pollution in the report. I had a prolonged debate with an American engineer, a colleague at UNICEF, after finding that some people believe that arsenic removal filters made water dangerously cold in the humoral medicine sense, and thus not suitable to give to children when they were ill. So when their children were sick, they drank arsenic-contaminated water. My UNICEF colleague had never heard of hot-cold health beliefs, and he argued vigorously that the concern had to be about real temperature. He's a good friend, but I'm not sure we ever resolved this disagreement. One of my Bangladesh team members, Shireen Akhtar, has a master's degree in anthropology, and she's a brilliant interviewer. Our usual approach was I would walk around getting the formal tour, and she would sit and speak informally with people and find out what was really going on. On one occasion, we went to evaluate the effectiveness of some very elaborate, expensive sanitation centers that had been built in some Dhaka slums. The NGO leaders who created these facilities with funding from WaterAid UK were very proud that the people, the slum dwellers themselves, were paying off the loans that had been taken to build them. This kind of local contribution is said to reflect a sense of ownership, a critical part of the participation concept. As I walked around observing toilet stalls, water collection points, and laundry stations, Shireen chatted with the women who were collecting entry fees from users of the facility. She learned that the actual slum dwellers were not using the facilities because the entrance fee was too high, and they were actually continuing to defecate and do their laundry in the local pond. They were proud of being able to pay off the loan, but they were getting the money by renting out use of the facility to rickshaw pullers and other passers-by. This discovery was a huge shock to the very well-meaning NGO leaders who initially were furious at us for deflating their optimism balloon. After 6 months, however, they told us that they had started building simpler, less expensive facilities that the people would actually use and benefit from. This made me feel that this kind of program evaluation is really worthwhile. We published a journal article about this experience. In fact, I tried to write something about interesting learning points of several of my assignments, thus contributing to the literature on international development. Most of them are in researchgate.net. In 2015, I had a very interesting and important assignment at UNICEF headquarters. The job was to introduce qualitative research methods into UNICEF's program monitoring system. The agency had good statistical information on program outcomes, but at that time didn't have any structured way of understanding why programs did not work in some places. I spent 3 months working with them on how to do situation analysis, transect walks, and especially focus group discussions, basically the rapid rural assessment techniques promoted by Robert Chambers. We went to Benin, West Africa, to do a test of some of these techniques. Oh, that trip to Benin was great. I had a first-class seat, and we lay down in real beds and slept. It was wonderful. Okay. According to my UNICEF colleagues, regional staff in UNICEF offices worldwide are now finding these techniques, especially focus group discussions, very helpful. Preparing for this assignment, I found the sociology literature ways of defining, explaining field methods much more clear than the increasingly jargon-riddled anthropology literature. Now I would like to return to the theme of recovering academic. Having spent so much life as a student and professor, supported by so many fellowships and grants, I felt compelled to contribute to knowledge. In 2014, my team and I co-authored a book on people's understandings of water culture in South Asia. I guess you can't see it, I don't know. Can you see that? That's our book.
Suzanne, you need to hold it right in front of your face because you have the background blurred. Yeah, that's it.
Is that better?
Yes.
Here's colored rice with the rest.
Okay.
Okay. It has a long chapter on the problem of arsenic in drinking water and discusses much of the interesting water lore we collected over a period of more than 8 years. The symbolic anthropologist in me was alive and well. This book writing experience started me in self-publishing. My little company, Development Resources Press, now has 5 books out, 3 by me and co-authors and 2 by others. I published Abe and Paula's book, Aliens on Our Shores. And I published my husband's PhD thesis on food. And then there's a new one on ethnobotany. Okay. The self-publishing started when I got 2 unacceptable offers from publishers. They had reviewed my book on water. Sage Press said they would only publish it if we did more research on the topic in India. I guess Bangladesh wouldn't have had sold enough copies. Lexington Books offered a contract but wanted us to have fewer photographs, 20 instead of our 74, and they would have owned the copyright in perpetuity. I was doing less consulting work by then, so I decided to write it the way we wanted it, keep the copyright, and publish it myself. The production and publishing process is much smoother than it used to be, but marketing I'm still finding not so simple. As much as I have enjoyed my practicing and applied work, I still find my old research notes interesting, and I want to finish up some of the studies that were abandoned when I went into exile. I also have some new scholarly interests. One is the experiences of women in local councils in India and Bangladesh. I never did give up the conference habit. Throughout all this time, I've continued to go regularly to conferences, especially the Applied Anthro SfAA, AAA, and the IUAAS, the international meetings. As the president of International Women's Anthropology Conference, or IWAC, I also go to the UN Commission on the Status of Women meetings every March. We always host a panel discussion at that time. At the UN women's meetings, I greatly enjoy listening in on conversations about women's issues among people from numerous different countries. One personal challenge I have had to deal with through my diverse career relates to the nature of ethnographic research itself. Immersing oneself in a community for an extended period of time inevitably leads to the formation of personal relationships, doesn't it? These relationships do not end when they stop being relevant to one's work life. This became ever more clear to me this summer when I made a 3-week trip to my original South Indian field site, where my husband and I had started our dissertation research 59 years ago. I brought some old photographs and 3 books about the people's customs. I also did 2 interviews with women council members while I was there, by the way. Dozens of people and their cousins and their daughters-in-law and their grandchildren, they showered me with affection, expressed huge appreciation for the well-illustrated books describing their old way of life. I had been very close to many of them during life crises, births, weddings, and some very painful deaths. They had helped us when I was pregnant during the last 7 months of my stay there. When I took my 9-year-old daughter back to visit in 1977, one old man was walking next to me down the street, and he pointed at my stomach and he pointed at the girl. "Is this the one?" I said, "Yeah, this is the one." And he patted her on the head and said, "This is our girl." Okay, unlike other social researchers, we anthropologists put our whole selves into our ethnographic studies. There isn't really any other way to do it, and extricating oneself is almost impossible. My lack of an academic affiliation also has posed some challenges over the years. Multiple grant applications requesting funding for our water study were rejected. I assume this was because we're not coming from an academic institution, not because I lacked skill in grant writing. Publishing books has been fairly easy. Getting them reviewed in anthropology journals has not. I see a large structural issue here. The general disconnect between American academic anthropology and the kind of practical interdisciplinary problem solving done by practicing and applied anthropologists. There are several reasons for the separation. I wrote about some of them in an article in Practicing Anthropology. Tenure and promotion depend on writing books,
Okay.
bringing in grants,
I'm on a
and service.
Zoom meeting with the senior.
Sid, please,
Can I call
please
you
mute
back?
yourself,
Can I
Sid.
get off?
I said, okay,
Okay,
tenure and
okay.
promotion depend on writing books, bringing in grants, and service to academic institutions, collaborating with colleagues and in different professions or with organizations outside of academia seems not likely to further career goals in most colleges and universities. I'm especially concerned about students. I think this rift is depriving them of the chance to learn about the many ways their anthropology degrees could be of value in their working lives. Contact with practicing and applied anthropologists could provide valuable learning opportunities. I have mentored several anthro students, one in Bangladesh and one in the United States and various others along the way. One intern was sent to me by Professor Owen Lynch, my friend from NYU, while I was working in the city. Giselle Maynard Tucker and I did a workshop for a few years at the Applied Anthro meetings for students considering careers in international development. The National Association for Practicing Anthropology, Kathleen Crane and Neil Tashima, and the Anthropology Career Readiness Network, Elizabeth Ryle Nolan, they're working hard to address these issues, but is it my imagination? I hear a loud, bored yawn from too many people who are pursuing careers in academic anthropology. In conclusion, I have had a very satisfying work life in nonprofits, local government, and as an international development consultant. I have great respect for 12 years in New York, 25 years in international development. I have great respect for scientific research, knowledge building, and the academic institutions that support it. However, I'm not sure this respect is reciprocated. I have the sense that colleagues without tenure teaching jobs are considered lower status by American professors. And I mention American because I haven't had the same problem with British anthropologists. Many anthro departments, as you all know, are at risk of being closed or merged with other departments. Stronger links with practicing and applied anthropologists could help them to show that their subject is useful in many different kinds of work and help guide anthro students into productive working lives. More mutually respectful communication might also help young scholars now working as adjuncts to learn about better paying professional alternatives. The truth is, I haven't completely recovered, nor do I want to. I still hope for mutually beneficial ways for academics and colleagues outside of academia to work together for the greater good. This is why I wanted to tell you this story. Another title for this talk could have been the John Lennon quote, "Life is what happens while you're making other plans." Mine has been a journey full of surprises, but if ethnographic fieldwork prepares us for anything, it's being open to the unexpected and seizing opportunities to explore totally unfamiliar realms. Perhaps I was more prepared for this difficult transition than I thought I was. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much, Suzanne. That's a fascinating story about your career and what you're still very active in, and it's terrific. And I mean, the issue that you've raised, the issue that you raise about the disconnect between the applied and the academic world is still an issue, as you have pointed out.
Yeah.
So now let me open up the floor to, or the screen, to anybody that has some comments or suggestions. And Suzanne, you don't mind taking a few questions, right?
Don't mind at all.
Okay. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Start off with? You can raise your hand, or okay. Louise?
Suzanne, it was a terrific talk, and I learned much more about your career than I had known before. I guess I'm not quite so discouraged as you are. I mean, I've been retired now 15 years, but my students in the last, since the turn of the century, let's say, have been doing, quote, academic topics, but usually they're working with some important issue like immigration or something, and they get themselves involved in stuff like, testifying for immigrants in terms of gender-based violence sorts of stuff. And I mean, it's not just people that are in the applied anthropology piece, but just generally, I think more and more students are interested in what I'm calling critical social issues, things that are going on that need solid research, but also solid activism. And so I see a lot of people, that's especially important, as you point out, in this period where there are hardly any academic jobs except for adjuncts, which you can't live on. So I'm pretty, have been pretty encouraged by where the discipline is going in that respect. And I don't think that, especially in some of the departments that do a lot of applied work, but I think generally speaking, a lot of younger anthropologists don't want to just teach and lecture. They want to do, important work that impacts on the real world.
I think my point of view is affected by having a PhD from Columbia, where that really was the expectation. I remember I was at a AAA meeting one time, and we were having one of our IWAC panels, and a woman who taught at San Jose Community College was saying, "Oh, I wish my students could meet you all," because I think this could be a story of just about anybody's students, like
Yeah, right.
like you said, there are all sorts of possibilities. But I think they apply also to people with more experience than the BA. As you get more experience, you can have more. I mean, my PhD opened all sorts of doors for me, but there are many, many possibilities. And what I want is for the students to hear more from people who are working outside of academia. I think that's what I really would like to have happen. And it does. At the applied anthro meetings, we have a lot of those conversations, but I still see the academics being, especially, well, I've been going to conferences all this time, and I've lived through POMO and all that, being an anthropologist of anthropology, basically, and there were points where there's questioning of objectivity, and there's this whole questioning of whether we can really work in other cultures or not. And there's Arturo Escobar, who thinks international development is somehow a criminal enterprise. And, there's all sorts of negativity there that really isn't helping.
Maxine?
Thank you, Suzanne. This was really very inspiring in a number of ways. And if I may, I would just like to mention what I think is one more very important disconnect, as you call it, between academic anthropology departments and the structures of teaching, that particularly the very heavy reliance on adjuncts in departments. And obviously it's a fact of academic life right now, but I think what is understudied are the structural and the political economy impacts of this omnipresent phenomenon that I just never see addressed in any serious or scholarly way by anthropology departments in scholarship or in policy or planning. And I think it's a critically important issue for departments to be facing and understand the implications, especially as academia goes forward.
Did you want to have a comment, Suzanne?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Does anyone else? Go ahead, Penny. You're muted, okay? You're still muted.
I think I'll have to give up.
I know you got.
No,
Gotcha.
you're okay.
Oh, great.
We hear it now.
Thanks. That was fascinating. And I feel some similarities, in our career path. But my experience with some of the UN agencies, FAO and UNICEF and groups like that, was I always felt that they first wanted, if it was a serious critical issue in the world, they would trust an economist, even a psychologist, before an anthropologist. I was used to being on some teams, so I'd be with a nutritionist, medical, and anthropologist, and I could make a case. But even in a lot of the women in development stuff, I still felt there was an incredible bias towards economists that are the ones that have the answers, and that the anthropologist was the naysayer, the person that would say, here's why your food distribution system won't work. Here's why your gender, there's a strong gender bias here. And then we were the naysayers, and the economists were the ones that sort of spoke the same language as a lot of the development groups and the UN agencies.
Yeah, it's true. When I was working for the city, I met a guy who worked at UNICEF, and I asked him if there was any possibility of my doing something in international development. He said, "Oh no," he really just rejected me. He said, we would consider you to be someone working in the trenches," was the way he put it. I don't know what that, except I was working too locally, too involved. But 20 years later, I had worked with UNICEF on several assignments. I'd done a lot of major program evaluation studies for them, so they knew me. And by the time when that assignment came up, it was actually kind of a brilliant idea that someone in their, what would they call it? One of their departments, it was not the program monitoring department, it wasn't the statisticians, it was someone in another department decided that they needed qualitative methods.
Yeah.
And there was quite a bit of competition for that assignment, but I think the fact that I worked for UNICEF so much by then really helped me to get a foot in the door. And but it's interesting because the statistics people were not involved in that discussion at all. It was just I had a lot of connection with a lot of the people working in health and all sorts of issues, but the statistics people kept their distance from that. In fact, that's something, I mean, I told you I was very interested, I got aware of the public health, and I was a member of the American Public Health Association for quite a while, and yet I couldn't go there. I just decided not to bother after a while because they only understood statistical methodology. They really didn't get it about the rest. And I mean, here's where Robert Chambers has done a brilliant job, and Michael Cherny at the World Bank has connected up with him too. But there's a hurdle there, and I think we also have to do some thinking, because case studies or situation analyses can be very powerful, and because people love a story, don't they? But you have to really put it in context to make it helpful in terms of planning or any kind of large scale change effort. You really have to see, is this story typical or not? So what we would do, I told you, we always worked with a statistical firm, a firm that did statistics. And so we would always present our statistics, and then I would give case studies that would illustrate the statistics were, and that really convinced.
It's very powerful.
It really made a big impact. But anthropologists have to be a little less snooty about the qualitative methods too. I mean, we have to not reject statistics, which I think I was never taught statistics in grad school. I took a course.
Me neither.
I took a course in statistics while I was working for the city. And I was working with the planning department sometimes, and I started to understand the importance of it, and why wasn't I ever taught that?
Yeah.
So we need to think about methodology too, don't we?
Yeah.
Second, Suzanne. First, Jim, you had your hand up, and so Suzanne, I'll get to you next. Okay, Jim.
So everything changes, and sometimes it seems chaotic. And for those of us who've been around a long, long time, we can start to recognize some shifts and trends, aside from maybe pendulum swings and all of that. And the reason I bring this up is that I think I see the changes in the ASA. And the reason I'm speaking right now is that we had an email from our president-elect, program chair, incoming president, Jay Shensul, as we were starting, that she's trapped waiting for a ferry boat with too high winds in Rhode Island coming back from vacation. And she really would have liked to be with us. But I think a trend that began already with Tim when he came in is to try to efface that dichotomy between the old dichotomy between academic and applied anthropology. Tim was bringing a lot of that in already. And I think that's been so central to the career of Jay. And I think she probably feels really bad that she couldn't participate in this, because I think you're addressing the issues that she's going to be pursuing with great vigor when she comes in as president.
Well, it's good we've tape recorded. We've recorded this.
She said in that message that she's eagerly awaiting the recording of this session.
I had a very interesting conversation with her in March at the applied meetings, and we have a lot in common. And I really was hoping she could be here. I wanted to talk to her about some of this too. So yes.
Well, now you know why she couldn't be here.
Good for ASA, combining things. I mean, there aren't a lot of places where I feel really welcome. Yeah, there are.
Suzanne.
Jay is the reason I'm here, because she told me that I should become involved with the ASA, and I've had problems and haven't been able to get involved in the last couple of years, but whatever. I've had a long career at the NIH, National Institutes of Health. I started in '98, and I was a very strange person for them to encounter for the others. There were not other anthropologists that I knew of. It was very unusual for an anthropologist to be there. I've retired. It's been about 4 years now since I've left. There are many anthropologists. Anthropologists have been involved in all sorts of things since I started there. And it's very difficult to get something funded, to get a research project funded from the NIH, unless you use mixed methods.
All right.
Because everybody asks, well, statistics are fine, but there's some things that you can't answer without qualitative methods. And my 20 plus years, I can't say I did it alone. I did it with other people, but after 20 plus years, I've seen it. It took a long time to move that super tanker, and I hope it stays in that direction, but it really has made a difference. The NIH now is not the NIH that I began with.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, no.
I think there are a lot of people like you, Suzanne, who have really interesting, important work, again, outside of academia. And why aren't people sending interns to sit next to you at the?
They did. I've
Good.
had lots of interns.
Good, that's fantastic. So that helps also to improve mutual understanding. And yeah, I mean, NIMH funded my dissertation research.
Mhm.
And yeah.
There are some government institutions that hire a lot of anthropologists,
Quite
like
a few, yes.
and the Veterans Administration has quite a number of anthropologists, and we don't see many of them at the AAA meetings because they generally only get funded for one conference a year, and therefore they go to the applied, and therefore there are typically a lot of sessions that have to do with medical anthropology there. The National Park Service, as a reason, and I forget, somebody will have to remind me who it was that really put her foot right in the door there and got people really established. Had a lot of, and I'm forgetting her name.
Shirley Fisk?
No,
it
that was Noah.
Wasn't Shirley, but it was somebody else. I forget her name right now. I can look it up later.
Yeah, I remember that too. Yeah, that was very interesting.
And but I had two quick stories. One is that I had a colleague that worked at the Research Triangle Institute here in the Triangle, North Carolina, and this is about 25 years ago. She was hired doing a lot of research for RTI in all kinds of things, both abroad and here domestically. And she said, she was sitting in the meeting and said, we really have done a whole lot of work here with what I'm doing, and we just need another anthropologist. And the director said, but we already have an anthropologist. Why would we need another one? But that's changed quite a bit since then. And the other thing I wanted to say, and I think this addresses an issue, is that if you take a look, I mean, there was somebody that did a paper or some time ago that noted that some universities, the major universities that fit into the top 20 graduate programs in anthropology, generally are light on applied anthropology. And so many of the programs that are on the periphery, so to speak, including, for example, the University of Memphis or the University of South Florida, just to mention two, North Texas, have a very long tradition of doing applied anthropology. All of those programs have internships, And if you were to go to Memphis today, for example, there are lots of places that say, yeah, I know about we need an anthropologist because these 20, 25 years of internships that have been going on in Memphis, these folks have now moved into the community when they've graduated, and they've started out as consultants, or they work for city programs or county programs. And so if you were to be in Memphis now, it's not a problem for local people understanding what anthropologists do, because there's a lot of anthropologists in the Memphis area. So that's one of the things that that takes place gradually, but we need to have this kind of connection between the academic and the applied in order to get interns into those kind of settings so that they know how the applied world works.
Like to hear more of these stories, this is encouraging. So, by the way, I've been paying my own way to go to conferences. No one pays me, but I've been earning enough money in international development that I can afford it. So, but there isn't any real way for people outside of academia to congregate or have conversations. There are very few opportunities. Because there isn't a lot of funding for them to go, and it isn't always convenient for them to go to conferences for a week. Sometimes it interferes with the work schedule or whatever, but there should be some better way to communicate. I think NAPA does try, and
There are also what are called local practitioner organizations.
yes,
WAPA in
right.
the Washington
WAPA's
area.
great.
I was president. I'm a past president of WAPA. And there used to be a lot more.
Yeah, we had
scattered
one in New York,
across
but
the
it didn't
nation.
last.
Yeah,
WAPA's
I'm not
very
sure
good.
what it is. We had a session on this at SfAA, why the world needs more LPOs.
Yes.
But I'm not sure what it is. There's some local groups, but they don't seem to be as active as WAPA has been. Of course, WAPA is in DC, where there's lots of universities, lots of work, lots of practice going on. So that might make the difference. But I would love to see more local organizations, because people can't go to every national conference.
It's true. When I was wandering out in New York City, feeling kind of lost, the concept of practicing anthropology really helped to rescue me. I found, oh, okay, I'm still an anthropologist, some kind of anthropologist. And it really helped me to feel connected. And we had an LPO there for a couple of years, and I edited the newsletter and put a lot of work into it, but it just fizzled. I think in DC, I mean, somebody should really think about why WAPA is so successful, because it's really probably the only one that's thriving. I don't know that there are others. And
What is WAPA, please?
Washington Anthropology, well, Suzanne,
Washington Association of Professional Anthropologists.
okay, all right. It's a very active
that
group.
professional or practicing?
Professional. We decided that we try to be inclusive. Way back, it's 40, I think it's past 40 years old now. But the people who founded it wanted to be inclusive and not exclude non-practitioners, not exclude academics. We welcome everybody.
As an
but our
old,
focus is-
excuse me, sorry, Carol, but as an old retired academic anthropologist living in Washington, is this something I could become involved in?
Of course.
Of course.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good
Yes.
enough. I'll contact you.
Okay.
Maybe not you, Sid, but others, but so that's my
No,
idea of a joke. Go
I
back.
think that was a joke. No, we'd be happy to have you.
Huh?
I also heard that I saw Ed Lebo the other day. He was in North Carolina for a talk, and I saw him and had lunch, and he said that a lot of the WAPA meetings are now via Zoom.
Right.
So I'm a WAPA member also, even though I live about 6-hour drive away.
Right.
So I need to you can join the community just like we're doing now.
Yeah.
There's some meetings where people will talk about what they're doing and things like that, give suggestions on methods and so forth.
By the way, Kathleen Crane wants us to call ourselves practicing professional and applied
know.
anthropologists, but it's too long. It takes
It's too long.
many syllables. But
It's too
anyway,
long.
she's also trying for that.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
And yeah.
As far as WAPA goes, we always met downtown DC for every meeting and knew each other well, but COVID happened, so we couldn't do that anymore. And we started meeting via Zoom. And now we have people from across the country and some international people as well. And so don't want to give up Zoom, but we're trying to figure out a way to get us back together in person as well.
Carol Henderson, go ahead.
Yeah,
Carol. Oh, Suzanne.
No,
my
my
go ahead,
book group
Suzanne.
has hybrid meetings. We do
Yeah.
both Zoom and in person now.
Yeah.
Figured
Okay.
out how to use a phone and shine it at whoever's talking.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Hi, Carol.
Hi, I loved your talk. I thought it was fabulous, and I have a lot to think about. I want to go back to the intersection of structural factors with personal efforts. And it seems to me, because you mentioned the problem of getting grants when you don't have an affiliation, and that's been very real for me as well. But one thing that has come up, and it came up with another group I was involved with, had to do with IRBs and the practical problems that people who do not have an academic affiliation would have attempting to apply for a grant where it had to pass through an IRB and they didn't have one. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or ever encountered this as an issue.
Well, I have my own little independent project, women in councils. And before I went to India to do interviews, Maxine recommended that I at least get signed permission from the people that I am interviewing, that they are agreeing to be interviewed. So that was one little step. It's not an IRB, but we need a structure. You're right. I mean, we need some kind of formal structure that will we can use. I've explored, I haven't really done much with them, but there's something called the National Council for Independent Scholars. And there are other organizations that might offer some possibilities here. I can't go too far with it, but we need some kind of institutional setup that will give us the same kind of legitimacy that our PhDs entitle us to. Really, I just found the PhD helped, but I wasn't trying to do a lot of independent work, and when I tried to do independent work, it wasn't enough. But wherever I went, I mean, the PhD just opened doors. That was a good thing.
Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of small points. One is that when I was on the AAA, let me lower. Okay.
I did.
When I was on the AAA executive board a few years ago, the term professional anthropology was being used a great deal to apply to applied anthropology. So there is some movement, or at least at that point, there was movement in that direction. I did find it a little confusing, though, because academic anthropologists are professional anthropologists too. So it was a little strange to try to draw that distinction. The other minor point that I wanted to raise is that you mentioned Ed Lebo, and I was just wondering what he's doing these days. And
I was too.
That he might join ASA.
Is that part, is that to me? You're asking me
Yeah,
that?
what's he doing?
Well, you mentioned
something,
him a couple of days ago.
if you're really interested, I think I could find out because he went to college with my son-in-law and we're all in DC, and I could just ask Joe to give him a buzz and find out what he's doing.
Yeah, I'd like to
And
know.
I'll report back to you.
Well, I did talk with him at lunch the other,
Oh,
about,
okay.
about 10 days ago.
What's he up to?
He is, he's completely retired. He does, some consulting on the side. He has one daughter and she just had a child. She's married and, but Ed has also run into some health issues that he's dealing with. But so he's got a boat, and he goes frequently to the place where Will Sibley, I don't remember the name of it, where Will Sibley, who was one of the big, longtime member of WAPA, and so he's really fully retired. And we could say a whole bunch of other things about the AAA and stuff like that, but I'll leave that for another discussion. But I'd suggest that if you want to find out what he's doing, email him. And I have his email address, and I can give it out. And I'm sure that he would love to hear from any of you. The AAA is his baby in many ways. I think he's working in, like the treasurer of another professional organization of anthropologists. I forget which one, an international organization of professional anthropologists. But as far as I know, he's not working.
And I would appreciate his email address if you can remember to send it.
I've got it. I'll put it if I can do it quickly enough, I'll find it on and put it on the chat. Okay.
Okay, great. And I think that Will was sailing on the Chesapeake Bay, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. David, you had a question or comment.
Yes, I was just trying to put something in chat. You are all invited to what is called the Replacing Anthropology, Reflecting on the Anthropologist in the Professional Realm meeting of the High Plains Society for Applied Anthropology this Saturday, which at their Ghost Ranch Fall Retreat, which actually this is earlier session. But anyway, there's one this Saturday that is now virtual. We have met, it's a local practitioner organization that consists of anthropologists and other professionals and who are involved in applying various social science fields and their fields of specialty in the real world. And we've been around for about 50 years. We've worked with WAPA, we've worked with the Society for Applied Anthropology. Remember, a number of members have been presidents or very active in the Society for Applied Anthropology, as well as the American, as well as AA and various related organizations. Anyway, you're all invited. Just look up, I'll put it in the chat, but it's the High Plains Society for Applied Anthropology. We're having it's about a 4-hour virtual meeting this Saturday, starting at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And you can go on the website. You can register for, as seniors, I think it's about $10 to register as a non-member, just to attend the virtual meeting and get caught up with some other local practitioners, as well as the High Plains actually has, if you look at their website, has members from throughout the world, as well as throughout the United States, even though it's based in the plains at the foot of the Rocky Mountains and in the Rocky Mountain and High Plains regions of the United States. So Just wanted to pass that on for anybody who's interested in a related session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to have a question or comment? Suzanne, would you like to have the final word on anything? And I did have one question for you. You didn't really, I don't think, talk enough about your publishing program. And I wonder if you could just talk a tad bit more about why you did it and what the problem is with marketing.
Well, marketing is just something I don't know anything about, basically. I don't know how the publishing industry gets things to libraries and so on. I am a member of something called the Independent Book Publishers Association, which is a good source of advice and guidance on things, but they're mostly working with people who do, romance and mysteries and things. They're not very many scholarly publishers. And my books are, they're scholarly books. What do you want to know? I got into it sort of by accident. I like to put lots and lots of pictures and things, and I have a certain opinions about, especially if you're writing about something that is not familiar to the reader, the more pictures, the better. But publishers have their own requirements, and my books haven't been necessarily acceptable to commercial publishers. After a while, now I'm just sort of getting things. I'm just doing mop up. I'm just trying to finish as much as I can on, all my life's work. Well, there's nothing much to say about it except producing a book nowadays is really way easier than it used to be. I mean, actually making a book. I have people I work with. I have a woman who does cover design. I have a woman who does interior layouts. She's in South Africa, by the way. My interior design person is in Canada. But I've found these through the self-publishing networks, some very good. I also do, that's another thing. I do ebooks of all my books so that they're really affordable to people in other countries. Well, see, for me, it's just not a money-making activity. For some people, it would be a money. My concern is just to actually get the things done and get them out to the people who care about them. So with Amazon and Ingram and a few other outlets, I just have to trust that the people who want this are going to find it somewhere, somehow. There's not a lot more to say. The books themselves, I think, I'm very pleased with them. I have 100 pictures of life in the area where we worked here, everything about life. The people who I'm writing about just love these pictures. I was on television in South India, and people were just crazy for these books. I mean, they loved the fact that I wrote about their old customs, My thesis was really about land reform, and I didn't write, I don't have a book about that, but I do have some articles. But they really wanted my books. They want them translated to Kannada language. The people I wrote about would buy them. I could have sold hundreds of copies while I was there. But, that's another thing. There are all sorts of ways of doing this. There's sort of what they call print on demand, which is what I do, which is anybody who wants the book can order it and it gets printed and sent to them. Some people actually buy hundreds of books of their own and actually sell them to bookstores themselves. I don't have time for that. I'm just too busy, and I'm not that interested in making money, so I haven't done that. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but actually producing the book itself is pretty straightforward now with PDFs, and I mean, there's a lot of technology available to. Adobe has a book design program. I used that once, and now I can hand off that job to someone else. I need to delegate it, some of the actual production work, but that is not the hard part. The hard part is getting them to libraries and bookstores. That's my main concern. And that
Well,
costs
I
money.
think I think it's really fascinating because I mean, you make it sound like, oh, producing a book is just like, you know, uh, you know, everyday occurrence. But I think there are quite a number of people in ASA that would be interested in making sure that their material that they've, the data they've collected, pictures they have goes back to the communities that they worked in, and that the
Yeah.
ideas and observations and field notes that they have are preserved in some way or another. And
Yeah.
this is certainly a way to do that. And I think
It's a very good way to do it. I gave away a lot of books when I was in India in July. I have some in the high school library of the village that I studied, yeah.
And not long ago, I guess it was last year, Jim Wild did a session on memoir writing.
Yeah.
And so Jim, this is a whole aspect of what your session, could have included a little bit more about, producing your memoir and getting it done without relying on a traditional press.
True.
What does it cost to produce a book?
I don't know, a few $100s, 1,000 maybe. It's not expensive. If I'm doing my own typing, I mean, I prepare the manuscript, but then I send it to somebody to do the layout for me, and she'll create chapters with chapter headings and page numbers and stuff like that, and someone else designs the cover. I sent her a few possible pictures and she designs the covers for me. But it's not that expensive. A lot of the people who do this they're not making mountains of money. I think they're just sort of nice people who want to do something for the world. It's very interesting, a little group of people. And there are some wonderful self-help resources. There's an ebook. Oh, this is another thing that Lexington Books would not do an ebook, and I very much wanted an ebook option for all my books have ebooks, but they wouldn't do an ebook. That was another sort of non-negotiable. But I lost my train of thought. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much.
Well, thanks for asking me, Tim. I really appreciate the invitation.
Oh, it's
Oh,
great.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
we all learned something.
yes, absolutely.
I hope so. I hope so.
Fascinating.
I'd like
Fascinating.
to hear more of these stories. I really would. I took a risk and got personal there, I mean, there are a lot of hurt feelings involved, actually, aren't there?
Mhm.
So, but that's part of it. That's part of life.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. And it's not just a matter of do we talk about our woes and our struggles. I mean, there's a lot that we can make out of that to understand what's going on in the discipline and what we've found that hasn't been heard yet. I think this brings it out. Sounds like you're helping to break the ice here.
I hope so.
Yeah, let me just comment on this one that Tim, you are doing a great job with this series. And I think the ASA as an organization is bringing people together and we're sharing our experiences. And I think we're learning a lot more than academic anthropology.
I think you're right. We are.
I'll tell my story some other time.
Oh, do, yes.
So I think it's one of the fascinating things that I learned about when I became president-elect is that the ASA brings together a lot of people coming from very, very different backgrounds and experiences, and that at this stage in our lives and careers, we now are really able to just sit down and share what we've learned.
Exactly.
I was thinking
Yeah.
about, councils of elders in tribal society, there's a lot of wisdom, circulating here.
Yeah.
Thinking about the
These young
ASA and
people don't listen to us.
Well, we listen to each other. If they're
thinking about the
pay
ASA
attention, it's
and
their problem.
what they say about old cars, it's not the years, it's the mileage. And we've got a lot of years and we've got a lot of mileage. And we're kind of the Cuba of anthropology, where we keep the old cars going.
We try.
Well, look, guys,
See you all next time.
okay, I'm gonna
This is
close it
great.
down for the day, and we'll see you in October. We have another talk coming up, fascinating talk, and I'll send that information out very, very soon. So we'll see you in a few weeks, and thank you very much for coming today. Suzanne, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to
Thank
have
you.
here. Great to have you. Thank you. All right. All right. We'll
Bye,
see you.
everyone.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.